Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 749. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 749, we discuss the attributes of good work input or entry. You choose your term. There is no single perfect approach to bringing work into an organization or team. Arguably, since people are involved, perfect may not be something that can exist in the real world, but rather there are good approaches. There are 9 key concepts for good work entry. Good work entry requires that these 9 have to be present in some form, regardless of whether you're doing Scrum, Kanban, waterfall, or some mix of frameworks. We want to be crystal clear. Deciding to forego any of these characteristics totally, other than for the briefest moment, will set you on the path to the 9th circle of work entry hell. We also have a visit from Susan Parente, who brings her Not A Scrumdamentalist column to the podcast. Susan and I diagnose why some organizations think that a product owner can also be a Scrum Master. What does good work entry look like? There is no single perfect approach to bringing work into an organization or team. Arguably, since people are involved, perfection may not be something that can exist in the real world. There are good approaches. Examples of good approaches are SAFe's enterprise portfolio approach, sprint planning in Scrum, large-scale Scrum, and replenishment in Kanban. Each of these approaches can deliver on the goals of good work entry. Even though they're used in different contexts and take different approaches, 9 core concepts are key for good work entry. Good work entry requires that all 9 of these be present in some form, regardless of whether you're using Scrum, Kanban, waterfall, or some mix of frameworks. We want to be crystal clear. Deciding to forego any of these characteristics totally, other than for the briefest moment, will send you on the path to the 9th circle of work entry hell. The 9 are: 1. Prioritization. All work must be systematically prioritized. Approaches that lack a solid approach to prioritization will devolve into a random walk at times of stress. 2. Control. Work needs to follow a defined path to enter an organization or team of any size. This requires that everyone involved in work entry has a modicum of discipline, self-restraint, and the wherewithal to hold each other accountable. 3. Transparency. The backlog of work and the process being used for maintaining the backlog needs to be understood and shared with all interested parties. When transparency fails, people create conspiracy theories and cheat. 4. Consistency. The policies and processes governing how work gets to the backlog or begins development need to be consistently applied. While carving policies into stone rarely makes sense, the work entry process should evolve based on context rather than changed erratically. 5. Frequency. The processes governing work entry need to happen on a regular basis. The more dynamic the environment, the more often. SAFe's PI planning, Scrum sprint planning, Kanban's daily replenishment all represent different prioritization frequencies. 6. Preparation. Work entry is a decision or set of decisions. Ad hoc decisions are rarely good decisions. 7. Respect. Respect, but not blind belief, for both the process and those participating in the process is critical for getting value from work entry. 8. Consequences. There have to be consequences when work entry processes are disregarded. Jumping the queue is not a victimless crime. Everyone gets to pay the price. 9. Ownership. Someone is responsible and accountable for work entry. Without somebody to actually make the steps of work entry happen, the flow of work will emulate water and seek the ground in any way possible. Each of these characteristics can be viewed as a rheostat that can be adjusted based on business context. For example, priorities might require more frequent examination in the face of market change, frequency, or the process might need to be temporarily less open when working on a super secret new project, transparency. Even though each characteristic reflects a range of behaviors, two human reaction ranges cause trouble. The first is making monolithic decisions on how the organization and all teams will approach these characteristics. This is akin to mandating that every team will use Scrum and have a 2-week sprint starting on Tuesday. Unless you're a very small organization, each team will have a very different set of needs. One size probably fits one team, some of the time. Not every team, all of the time. The second is the propensity to turn any of these characteristics to zero. For example, not requiring any preparation for planning or refinement sessions will generate frustration, storytelling, and jumping the queue. Good work entry is independent of the method you follow. How you achieve good, however, is dependent on your context. As in every human-based endeavor, every organization and team leverages its own version of frameworks and business practices. Implementation is a set of trade-offs that define a continuum. Finding your good can be achieved by focusing on two important outcomes of good work entry: value delivery and sustainable pace. If we think of these two goals as sitting on either end of a continuum, we can evaluate the tension caused as we make trade-offs between the two goals to evaluate whether our work entry approaches are good. Different business contexts require a never-ending shift in the trade-off between maximizing value delivery and sustainable pace. For example, typical teams without undue pressure of a death march or the inability to control workflow to them would naturally balance value delivery and sustainable pace. This is often called achieving work-life balance. The trade-off changes when confronted with a production or business emergency. In this case, a team will care less about attaining a sustainable pace than delivering value. The ultimate value sustainable pace anti-pattern is everything's an emergency and teams or organizations are forced into a continuous death march. Unfortunately, this is not an uncommon management approach. In this circumstance, teams make choices about what value means to protect a modicum of sustainable pace, or they just burn out. Tech debt is a politically correct word for corners being cut to make an unsustainable pace more sustainable. Good work entry can be practiced by any organization or team, whether they are leveraging agile or plan-based approaches to working. We have seen organizations practice disciplined work entry while acting in an ad hoc manner in every other aspect of work. We've also seen agile organizations that are wildly out of control. The out-of-control organizations did not fare well when the 9 characteristics were evaluated. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. We look forward to the conversation. Susan Parente, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Great to be here, Tom. Always great to be here. We're actually we're meeting not at the crack of dawn. It seems strange.
It is strange. It is strange. Are you at least drinking a cup of coffee? Last time we recorded, you were plowing through a latte, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. No, had that already. It's already, which is good because it's now taken effect. It's already incorporated into the bloodstream. So
excellent.
It's probably more effective now, more awake. Yeah, it's actually quite pleasant. This is like a normal time people chat. So we'll see if our listeners notice some improved alertness. Maybe we'll make a shift.
Maybe. Susan, your I'm Not A Scrumdamentalist column is one of my favorites. I enjoy the conversations, and matter of fact, I think telling you right before we went on, started to record, I was editing a column that will actually go up on August 7th. I think this is August 7th, 2022. So it's sort of my Susan Parente morning. Susan, let's dive right in. I recently was asked how basically to deal with a situation where a team has a brand new product owner. This product owner doesn't understand anything about the product technically, has no technical acumen, and doesn't believe they should ever have to learn anything about the technical side of the product. The team and the product owner are basically fighting over not prioritization as much as sequencing the work so that the work actually makes technical sense versus what the product owner wants them to work on.
Well, I have an interesting take on that. There's sort of like two ways that could run. One is the product owner should learn a little bit more about the technical aspects so they can like appreciate how things work together, how they integrate, because even though that's technical and inner workings, it actually does fall back to or relate to the value that's created for the end user, right? So that's my one spin, and we can delve into that more. The other is that they could just operate from a total business value sense of, here's what I want. I want a car that takes me to the grocery store. I don't care how a car works. I just want to get there. This is what I want. And they can come totally from the user perspective. Now, if they do the latter, they then have to listen to the technical team insofar as, so remember, the technical team decides how the work is going to be done, not what work to do, but how it's going to be done. So if they say, well, I must have a steering wheel first, and they're like, well, in order to do that, like we've got to put tires on the car.
Or better yet, you might have to have a steering column to put the steering wheel on.
Or like some axles. Like I'm, to be honest with you, as much as I know about cars, I'm pretty sure they're designed from the bottom up and not the top down, right? So you kind of have a frame first, and then you deal with the cup holder last, right? So that kind of thing. So they either have to acquiesce to the team in the priority of things to deliver on what it is that they want, or they should better know the product to have an understanding for that. So I'm not going to say they have to be more technical, but they can't say, I want to get to the grocery store and I'm going to tell you what I want first to be in the car. They're going to say, well, if your goal is to get to the grocery store, then I'm going to start at the bottom and we're going to give you like a chassis, we'll put some wheels on it, and maybe at first it'll look like a go-kart, and then we'll get to something with a roof or whatever, right? So we remember, like in Agile, we're kind of striving for that like 80% in a way. Like you're not going to get a Rolls Royce, but you are going to get what it is you need to do whatever it is you want to do. And that's discovered as you work. So it's not like it's not to come up short, but it's literally, what do you need, right? And so maybe if your grocery store is a mile away, maybe it looks a lot more like a golf cart, especially what is your budget, right? So what is your budget? Is the price of fuel, a factor for you? Or maybe an electric golf cart would be the best way to get to the grocery store. If you live in Hawaii or you live in Florida, as opposed to Montreal, a golf cart will probably work most days, right? So anyway, not to get off track, but I don't necessarily think the product owner needs to have the technical knowledge, but if they don't have it, then they can't tell the technical team that it doesn't matter. Meaning that they still need to get from where they are to the thing that creates that value, that delivers on the requirement, feature, or need that the end user has, that the product owner wants.
I don't think anybody's arguing over the specifics in terms of, hey, this is the goal. We need to create we need a portal for people to sign up for our insurance product. And it was not an insurance company, but the idea for that, obviously, one has to create libraries, do a number of basic technical things. So there's a difference in my mind between prioritization and sequencing the work. Sequencing the work is a much more of a how you do it kind of question.
Yeah.
And the person who asked the question was indicating that the product owner was, without any technical acumen, was getting involved and having a extremely powerful opinion about the sequencing of work. In essence, getting into the how without any acumen.
Yeah, and that's. I think that's probably the more egregious thing than whether the product owner is technical or not. Because even if the product owner was technical, that's still not their place to dictate how the work is done. So that's the way that I would go with that. And it's interesting because it maybe is not as clear of a boundary in some cases, as maybe kind of a gray area. But that's why also, if you look at it, the product owner is part of the team too, right? It's not like they're out there and we're over here. Like, it should be a team together approach. And I think that sometimes we separate that. That is actually more of a traditional thing, to have the customers out here and we're over here. The customer says they want this and then we go do something. Like, it's more an agile where we work together to understand the product owner. What is it they want? What is it they need? Product owner could show up at the daily stand-up. They don't have to be there, but they're allowed to be there. Like, it's a very different culture as we always talk about than traditional. And one of the ways is that it's not about the push and pull between the customer and the team doing the work. It should be the union of them to talk together, work together, understand together what's important. And if the product owner is just ignoring it and saying, either this is how you're going to do the work because I'm the product owner, I'm going to tell you, no, it doesn't work that way. The team is the best at knowing how the work is best to get done. What the team should not be doing is, designing soup to nuts of the product at the beginning without, you should be making those decisions about, or conversations about how it's going to get done for each iteration or each increment, not doing it all up front. But this is complicated. One of the systems that I was supporting recently, it was a software development system. And so basically a software system, computer-based, also usable on the phone. And there's like a lot of database stuff there. And so at the beginnings of that major program development, there's a lot of things that don't seem like something that would be valuable to the product owner or to the end user, but without which you just really can't do it. It's like the foundation for your house. It may not be like, well, I wanted a kitchen. I don't see how this big thing of concrete is going to help me with that. And you're like, well, it will, because without that, we can't even give you a kitchen. We can't give you a house, right? And so that's kind of, to me, all of that database work, if the person is not technical, might not really appreciate all the work that has to happen before to even create a structure, almost like an software architectural layer that needs to be put in place so that you can then build things on top of it.
Right.
So that's one of the challenges of not being technical, not realizing that.
As a leader, as a coach, as a mentor, all of those things that you've done before, how would you have that conversation with the product owner so that they would hear and not just immediately shut down and say, don't tell me what to do?
Well, get back to what is the value? Why is this overall project important? What are the goals? And then, understanding that and say, okay, great. So if you want those things, the team is there to deliver those things, but there's an order that they need to operate in order to deliver those. And I guess I'd probably try like an analogy of a house or analogy of something that they can put their head around, because if they're not technical, they, like I said, they just don't realize. Like I can think of a lot of people who don't realize all of the database structure that goes behind many systems that they use. Having started out as a software developer and actually created databases and set up databases, like I have a tremendous appreciation. And the things that I did were small potatoes compared to the teams that I manage and what they do. But at least like I've seen the tip of the iceberg to appreciate that. And so, yeah, I guess I would try to explain it in terms of something that they understand. It's like part of me wants to do the ref at the football game and throw like the yellow flag onto the field.
Yeah.
Just be like, hey, you're off. You're like, no, it's not your place, product owner. I guess it depends on my rapport with that person, how I can approach them. I'm actually, I do a lot of, I want to say it's reading, but it's actually audiobook listening. And there's a book I started reading called Radical Candor. Very, very interesting book. I think you'd find it interesting. And one of the things it talks about is being able to just be truthful with people rather than like sugarcoating everything. And one of the things that's important for that is the trusted relationship you have. And so you ask me like, well, what would I say? And I would say to myself, well, it depends how well I know the product owner. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, as a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, I've put some effort in to create relationships with everybody so that I actually could speak directly. And the reason it's radical candor and not, forgot the other word the woman was going to use, but basically candor meaning like, this is just my view, right? So there's not like, I'm right and you're wrong, but it's like, here's how I see it. What do you see? Right. So that's like, it's a space for discussion, but you can be genuine about it. And so I think that with all of this, it's becoming more obvious to me in Agile, especially, that it's not about the nuts and bolts of Agile. It's about leadership and relationships, how we work together, the rapport that we have with one another. And it's funny because I feel like, as an engineer, I've spent most of my education learning how to do things. And even, Agile, I have all these certifications that multiple choice questions and you got to answer them right and all these things. And at the end of the day, it's actually leadership that I find is usually missing. And one of the things about leadership is creating trusted relationships with the people that work with you. And the people, either if they report to you or they're lateral or they're above you, our job is to create a trusted relationship so that we can just say what's there, and not beat around the bush. And I was actually talking to a colleague of mine about a project I was doing with her and another person. And we have a trusted relationship enough that I can be frank with her. But the other colleague, it doesn't feel like that they have that between each other. Like I have it with each of them, but they don't have it with each other. And it's how much they know each other. And so I feel like I'm the go-between and like trying to.
You would be.
And it's like I understand each person's perspective, but it gets to be kind of burdensome to be that go-between. And so anyway, I mean, that's just an example, but I'm finding it very interesting. Maybe it's where I'm at in my career right now, but it's like everything that doesn't work looks like a leadership issue. And when I say leadership, like I don't mean the number one person in the company. I mean, every one of us shows up at work as a leader. Even if we're in a self-organized team, we're on a Scrum team, there are no leaders. We don't have any team leads. We're all in it together. Yeah. So what that doesn't mean there's no leader. It means everyone's a leader, right? We're all leaders. We all show up as leaders together. And I think that when that's not present, it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think context, though, helps us determine who plays the role at any given time. Because if everybody's the leader all at the same time, that would be a mess too. Given that it's leadership, the one thing that it wasn't readily apparent was whether or not this product owner ever had received either any training or coaching as to be. They were just sort of promoted. Actually, they were hired in from the outside and said, "Oh, you put down that you were a product owner. You must be one. Therefore, you are now one." As organizations trade people, how would they? What would be a good way to determine whether or not someone actually had that ability to be a product owner?
It's interesting. So it's one of those things that I'm finding this with Scrum Master. So I, in the past few months, I've been interviewing some Scrum Masters for a role. And even the person I was interviewing with, I was finding that their definition of what a Scrum Master does is not the same as what mine is. And some of that is because how the customer is using Scrum Masters is different than the way that I do. But the same thing occurs for product owners, right? So it's, we probably have in our mind, like, who a product owner, like, what is their role, what they should be doing, who is a product owner. And then people have an experience, and that experience may not match. So how do you fix that? Processes in place, standards. I mean, I don't want to get overly big on documentation, but we make this assumption. Well, you're a product owner at these 5 other places, so you know how to be a product owner here. No, not necessarily.
Right.
I actually commented to one customer. I said, if you took Jeff Sutherland and you put him on this contract, he wouldn't know how you're using Jira because you're not using it the normal way. They're just you make assumptions. They're like, oh, well, you're a Scrum coach, you're an Agile coach, you know how to do this. And I go into their Jira, I'm like, I don't understand how this is set up. And it's like, oh, well, we do this and we do. I was like, oh, nobody would have ever known that. And so these are the things.
Someone once called that tribal knowledge. So there is tribal knowledge that needs. So you need to obviously synchronize before you do that.
Yeah.
Well, it can be a hot mess. And obviously for this person who asked the question, it was a hot mess for them. They were actually, they indicated that they were sending their resume around. So that was the outcome was they were going to lose some people.
Well, when a person doesn't see a way to resolve a problem, then they remove themselves from the situation. Like, that's their only power for resolution, is to go someplace else.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if you do that too quickly, you may find yourself moving a lot because everybody's got different problems. So you're not going to get away from the problem. It's like, oh, I don't like my neighbor, I'm going to move neighborhoods. Oh, great. You know what the chances are you're not going to like one of your neighbors in a new neighborhood? I'm like, I can almost guarantee it.
Probably high. You're right. Susan, how would people continue the conversation?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente. It notes me in the DC area. I'm actually in Delaware, but I do some work in New York area and the DC area, but you can find me there. And or you can email me, Parente, Parente, at S as in Sam, the number 3-tec.com. And I would love to continue the conversation. There's no boilerplate answers. If there was a boilerplate answer, I would say it's probably not a very good or usable answer.
I agree with you 100%. Susan, until next month, thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Parente, welcome back to the software. After 17, 18 years of this, I figured I probably should know what the name of the podcast is, the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
I just call it SPaMCAST, Tom. That makes it easier.
Yeah.
It's great to see you again.
It is excellent to see and hear you also. Susan, today, this is an anti-pattern. You probably can use other words that would get a not a clean rating on the podcast. The idea of Scrum Master / product owner. Help?
Oh my, like when I first heard that, one of my colleagues actually said that as his role. I'm a Scrum Master / product owner. I was like, oh no. Like I didn't know what to say. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I got to,
yeah, anybody that says that's interesting, you generally have to do a double take to make sure that isn't being a tad facetious. Ooh, that's interesting.
So I was like, so tell me more. What exactly does this look like? And what he said is, well, it looks like I was hired as a product owner, and then they're like, oh, by the way, we don't have a Scrum Master. We want you to do that too. It's like, interesting. Again, so I mean, it's not. It's certainly not the person's fault. They don't believe that it's the best idea. However, they're hired on the contract and doing work, and they're doing both those roles. And I'm like, okay, like.
So isn't that a conflict of interest?
It absolutely is a conflict of interest. I will say in the organization he's supporting, it is not viewed that way, but they also have project managers. They have some other roles in there. Like what do we call it? Well, we're doing Scrum butt. We're doing Scrum.
Oh, yeah.
It is so common that people are doing Scrum, but that it's actually called Scrum butt.
Actually, there was a book by that title.
So unfortunately, yes, it is a conflict of interest. So let's just clarify. So product owner is there to represent the customer, represent the business, truly understand the value of things that are added to the product or features of the product or requirements of the product. And they're really the thing that I think is probably most missing in traditional project management. So we usually just get a list of requirements and, okay, here's all the things the customer wants. Okay, they're yours. Now go execute, right? And so first you actually have to create a plan based on those requirements. Then you execute that plan, and then, at the end of the project, come back to the customer and say, here's what you asked for, right? Now, we all know that you end up doing probably 80% of what you would propose to do. And the problem in traditional project management is that what 80% did you do? Did you do the 80% that was most important, or did you do the 80% that was not important?
It was the easiest 80%.
Exactly. So for example, building a car, 80% could look like, a car that doesn't have upholstery on the back seat, or it could be a car with, no water pump, right? So I would take the first one over the second, because the car can still get from point A to point B with missing upholstery. But if there's no water pump on a hot day, not going to get very far. I don't even think on a cold day you're going to get very far.
As soon as that engine warms up with
Exactly.
nothing move the antifreeze and things around, it will it'll stop working.
So that's why a product owner is there. A product owner is there to say, you know what? If I got to choose between the water pump on the engine and the upholstery in the back seat, I'm going with the water pump, because without that, we literally can't move. And so having that product owner that we can talk to throughout the project and understand how things are going to be used, what's needed, why it's needed. It's not just here's a prioritized backlog. It's more than that, because even, as you design things, like I listen to my developers look at like a user story, and they're like, well, that's interesting. I wonder what they meant by that. Maybe my word for the day is interesting.
That's interesting.
Like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what they meant by that. And so like literally they're trying to understand and get inside the head of the product owner. And that's product owner's job, is to not just prioritize, but to really explain, you might say, like the user experience, like how the user will actually use the thing so that the developer can develop it in a way that it will be used. And if this sounds a lot like quality, it is. Like that's, it's like, what do we define as quality? It's like fitness for use, right? So there's our product owner. Now, who's the Scrum Master? Okay, well, let me start by saying the Scrum Master is not the product owner, not the project manager, not the team lead, not the software development lead or any development lead. They're literally like I think of them as like the sergeant at arms, which I don't know, people know Robert's Rules of Order, but they're like the one that says, no, you're not following the process. Here's what the process is. Like, keep them on the railroad tracks, keeping them alive. And you would think that wouldn't be such a big deal, but it is, because most software developers have decades of software development experience and very little experience doing Scrum or doing Agile. In fact, a lot of them are like, been doing Agile for a while, and they're like, yeah, I'm still not so sure I like this better than traditional, right? So they're literally like, they're very versed in development, but they're not very versed in the processes. And so keeping them on track with the processes, building team trust, supporting the team and listening to each other, and, creating team camaraderie. I mean, I know it seems like, oh, if you just put a bunch of people together, like they'll create some sort of camaraderie. They will, but it won't necessarily be good. Like it takes, this is where I'm going to come back to leadership. Like in our last podcast we talked about. So I noticed this recently. I stepped in for a Scrum Master who was doing a poor job, and I stepped in, and one of the biggest differences I think I made for that team was giving them a sense of like team identity and camaraderie. And how I know I made this difference is because the first retrospective, there were just a few people who spoke up. And the last retrospective that I did with this team before I moved on and somebody else came in that role, the last one that I did with them, more people talked, like almost everybody on the team talked, which, by the way, I was like, you're either going to talk or I'm going to pick you out. So you may as well say something. A
little motivation.
Slightly forceful, but I don't think I actually did call on anyone. But most of the people, what they had to say was gratitude towards another team member for something they did during the sprint. That is hugely different. So there's something that I created in that space. And, what do I bring to that team? I think that those skills, those leadership skills, I can create a space of gratitude, create a space of camaraderie. And to the outside person, it doesn't look like a whole lot's happening, but I take it to like, you watch a band play and the bass guitarist, you don't feel like they're doing a whole lot, but if they stop playing, like the sound would be totally different. It would be missing, right? And so a lot of times good leadership is not obvious. It seems like, oh, that would happen either way. Well, it didn't. It didn't happen until I showed up. The way that team operated, they actually operated as two separate teams that would meet together. So they weren't even one team. Yeah. So, I mean, there was a huge shift that happened and a lot more camaraderie. And even though people like came and left, when I moved on, that team felt like it was finally solidified. And before that, it felt like, here's a place where we put a bunch of people and then there's some stuff they have to do. And like, it didn't really have like some purpose.
Right. It was a group, not a team.
Yeah. And so that's where I think the Scrum Master is there to like, it's not just, okay, do this process, do this. You can only take 15 minutes for your daily stand. Like, it's not just that. It's creating a space where things can be productive, where people can work together. And I think that one of the reasons that's difficult is because it's a little bit, it's not as grounded of like, it's not like a check the boxes like thing that you did, but it's why like why is a coach that's good so important, and why is one that's not good so painful, right?
Well, in the circumstance that you described, we have team leaders, we have project managers. Why can't they play that role? Why can't they do all of that stuff so that, or if they can't, why can't the product owner do that?
Well, team leaders, sometimes they can, sometimes they have the skills to do that. Usually, like a team lead or a tech lead, they get to that position because of technical competence. And technical competence is usually not soft skills. In some cases, people, I do believe, are natural born leaders, but in most cases, people are kind of unaware. And if you're not self-aware, then how are you going to be a good leader? I mean, you might be a team leader insofar as you're like, oh, I can ask Bob. Bob's been around for 20 years and he knows everything. So that you often end up being a team lead because you can answer most of the questions. You've been there a long time.
Doesn't really make you a leader.
No, it doesn't make you a leader. So there's that person. Project manager, I always think of people say, oh, what does the project manager do in Scrum? I'm like, nothing. They're not there. But yet I have known many Scrum projects or Scrum implementations where there is a project manager. In my experience, a lot of federal government contract work, the project manager ends up being the government person who's accountable. So remember, as contractors, you can't really make decisions about, how money is used. And that includes, we're going to do this feature, feature A over feature B. That is actually a decision about how federal funds are used. And those decisions can't be made by contractors. So what ends up happening is a project manager oversees that and says, okay, somebody said A is needed over B. I agree with that, and I authorize that. So it has to be authorized by a federal person. So a lot of times I think that's what the PM ends up doing. And if that happens to be the case, you may be sharing, like that PM may be PM for multiple projects or multiple teams because they're just being the authority there. So product owner, why can't the product owner be the Scrum Master? Well, I would say that the product owner is quite busy enough understanding the requirements, busy doing release planning, looking at the whole overall vision of the product. If it's a very large product, maybe there are multiple teams doing different work and they need to collaborate and integrate those efforts. I don't think they have time to do that and be Scrum Master. The other thing is that when you mix product owner and Scrum Master together, it starts looking a lot like I'm the project manager and this is my team and I'm going to tell them what to do. Like, it's almost like you're giving them too much power. It's like, I'm the cop and the judge. You're like, okay, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Right. So I think some of it is like division of power for purpose so that there's nobody that has too much power. And I also think it's because there is so much work for the product owner to do and so much work for the Scrum Master to do that combining them means you're not getting all of the resources that you probably need.
No, I agree. I think it's those two. Well, I don't know that if we're talking about Scrum, any of the three roles are truly combinable very easily, albeit I'm sure that the listeners can point out scenarios where it worked for them in an individual context. But in the broader sense, it really doesn't. I mean, who's going to have the team point of view when the product owner, and most product owners I've known want the moon, so to speak.
Yes.
And so they'll be pushing that. And if you want sustainable pace, then someone has to understand the gate and control the entry of work into the team or team of teams or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting conundrum. I think part of the problem, at least in the world that I live in, is that many organizations see both of these roles as part-time. It's like a product owner, 5 products that you'll be the product owner for. And Tom, you be the Scrum Master for 5 teams. And so therefore they're, even in that circumstance, they're running around like the hair is on fire. And I don't think they do a good job at any of those things. So if you combine the roles, it's like, okay, 5 teams, 10 roles. How's that going to work out for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because not having a full-time product owner, what usually ends up happening is you're going to, let's say you're doing backlog grooming with the team and your product owner's not there. Guess what? Your development team is now doing a lot of conjecture on what something is and how it ought to work. And that's wasted time. I want my developers to spend most of their time doing development, not in meetings, not talking about
come
what
on. Meetings is that's what we're all there for. Meetings are the, sort of like the bread of life. No?
I could be quoted for saying, boy, we have a lot of meetings for an agile organization, and I'll like chuckle and everybody will laugh. And I'm like, no, I mean it. Like, we really are not that, like, if we're going to have that many meetings, why don't we just be a traditional approach? Like, wasn't that one of the things that we shifted to agile for, was to lose the meetings? Yeah, that's rough. But I think that to me is one of the results of not having a full-time product owner. The product owner probably should be in a bunch of meetings. I'll be honest with you. They should be in meetings with customers or customer representatives to understand their needs. But the developers, the meetings they should be in are, coding session meetings, like paired programming or, working with the team, working through bugs and fixes and code reviews and peer reviews and things like that. Those are the meetings. Those are working meetings. Those aren't meetings like you and I go to, Tom, where we are like, would it be better to be at a dentist appointment right now or in this meeting? Like, that's a meeting, So,
I hear you.
A meeting isn't 2 people working together to create something. A meeting is a thing that either, well, in my case, a lot of times I'm facilitating the meeting, but most people attending a meeting don't actually need to be there for the most part. They need to be there for 5 minutes of an hour-long meeting.
And I think we can tackle that on our next meeting.
Meetings, and more meetings.
Recording session, which is not a meeting. So, Susan, how can people continue the conversation?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente, and I show up as being in the DC area, although I'm kind of all over the place in the Northeast corridor. Or you can email me, Parente, Parente, at S as in Sam, the number 3, -tec.com. I would love to continue the conversation and tell me how your roles show up in your organization and where you have your challenges. But I think if don't have these clearly delineated roles, I think you're definitely going to have some challenges.
Amen. Susan, as always, this went well outside the lines, and I think I learned much more than if we just handled the individual question. So thank you again for bringing your perspective to the software process and measurement cast.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
In Reread Saturday News, today we begin our reread of Team Topologies, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. The book contains front matter, including a foreword, a preface, 8 chapters, a conclusion, and end matter. That's a glossary, recommended reading references, notes, index acknowledgments, and about the author. So today, we tackle the front matter. Remember to buy a copy and read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 750, we'll mark the return of Evan Lebon to the podcast. Evan and I will discuss the domains of business agility and perhaps whether Taylorism still has a place in the world. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?